Welcome to the Discussions and Dragons podcast. This is our first episode of the podcast. This is a show where we discuss Dungeons & Dragons. This episode, we'll be discussing the 9 playable races of 5th edition D&D found in the Player's Handbook. I am here with our resident Dungeon Master. Introduce yourself, please.
Hello.
Fantastic. So, we are talking about the 9 races.
Yes.
Have we decided which one we're going to start with?
I thought it'd be best to just start with the first one found in the Player's Handbook.
Which is?
Dwarves.
Alrighty. Go for it.
So, in summary, dwarves are just... Well, for all of these races, the stereotypes are very prevalent. Dwarves are short, they're stout, miners by trade, they like gold, gems, silver, rare ores and minerals, and they are very hardy. They have just a sort of, how do you say it? With their culture, they're very...
Stoic.
Yes, stoic. Perfect word. They're slow to trust, but are definitely friendly with their kin.
And anyone else they see as their kin.
Yes. Variations of the dwarves, such as from different regions.
What are the different regions of dwarf? Because I know there are a couple.
There are hill dwarves and mountain dwarves. Those are the 2 sub-races of dwarves. Think of you have Americans and you have East Coast and West Coast, North and South, that kind of thing. Just same thing, dwarves, but from different places.
And I'm seeing here that there are more types, but we're only talking about the ones in the Player's Handbook.
Yes.
Something very closely related to dwarves, I've heard, are gnomes in this game, correct?
Yes.
Would you care to tell me about gnomes and their kin?
Gnomes are... good way to describe gnomes. They have vibrant expressions. They have a delighted dedication to what they do. They're skinny, small, smart. Think of gnomes as the tiny nerds of the D&D world. They spend a lot of their time just tinkering and living in the woods.
Resourceful.
Yes, not quite like another race, the halflings. Gnomes are inherently in their own. They like creating things. Just hence the tinkering.
Yes, and you might be thinking of, for people who don't know about the races in this game, you might be thinking like lawn gnome or garden gnome. That's not the case here.
No, gnomes are just simply short, pointy ear, not elf, not human, not halfling, just their own thing, and just own race. Difficult to explain.
I feel like in every fantasy world, gnomes and dwarves and halflings are really hard to differentiate between.
They are short, all of them.
Yeah.
One of the main differences are the average lifespans.
Tell me about gnomes first, then dwarves, and we'll go on to halflings.
Gnomes, I believe... Double check here real quick. Gnomes live between 350 and 500 years on average. And let's see the other one. The dwarves live to roughly around 300 years on average, or 350 years on average. And halflings are, let me double check the reference here. Would say about 200 years is the average for them.
Also, we are referencing the Player's Handbook, if anybody was wondering.
Yes. And speaking of halflings, these are, if anyone has seen the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Middle-earth sort of fantasy world, these are hobbits, for lack of a better word, just referencing that. They're peaceful, they keep to themselves, they simple folk, live off the land, farming, making small communities. not really much for industrialization or greed or.
From what I know, they avoid most larger creatures, which is most creatures.
Yes, they're just small passive humans.
They kind of just survive in the shadows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's talk about the appearances of these races.
Mm-hmm.
So with the three we've gone over so far, we got dwarves, gnomes, and halflings. Gnomes and halflings, I would take it, are very similar in appearance most of the time.
Short, but gnomes have the pointy ears. Halflings have the rounded ears, like humans.
So that's the main cosmetic difference.
Yes,
Cosmetic,
and
just physical.
Gnomes have more. Gnomes are more elvish in their appearances, right? And halflings are more human in their appearances.
Dwarves are just dwarves.
Dwarves are just short, If you took
Everybody knows what a dwarf looks like.
you took a regular person, you smushed them down, gave them a Scottish accent and a lot of hair.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like dwarves, I think those are the most recognizable fantasy characters. Just gigantic beards.
If not elves as well.
Oh yeah. But with elves, you have like Santa's elves. You can probably tell, like some people, if you were to think of an elf, if they were to draw it, half of them would draw like tall, pointy-eared ones, and half of them would draw like Keebler elves.
Oh man.
Speaking of elves,
Yes.
tell me about them.
Elves are just an elegant race portrayed by D&D. They live, let's see,
Too long.
well over 700 years, and they are really about the refinement of just art and beauty in the world. And think of if you were a person and you were composing a song, and you said, "Oh, I have this like short little song I'd like to share for you. It's 2 or 3 minutes long." Well, with elves, they have this sort of timeless perspective that says, "Hey, I wrote this short ballad. You want to hear it?" You say, as a human, "Oh yeah, sure, I got plenty of time." And then they sing to you for 14 hours straight because that's their definition of slow.
Yeah, so they live too long. Now, elves are very woodland residing, aren't they?
Woodland, and they also have. Let's see. A good example would be, once again, Lord of the Rings, Rivendell. They keep to themselves, just like the dwarves and halflings keep to themselves, and they like try to live in isolation, but still have refine their culture over and over and over because they live such long lifespans. They have all of this knowledge and skill, and just wanted to focus on the, let's say, more creative things and their passions for life, because they don't really have to worry about, oh, I have a short life, I need to do as many things as possible, or have these other simpler goals.
I think a good way to describe it would be that, like, while gnomes and halflings live in isolation from other races, like more powerful or bigger races, elves, like, build their societies and isolate their societies from those races.
That's a good example.
Like, the elves are not a hiding race.
They're very prevalent.
Yeah.
And very deadly because of their skills and knowledge of combat. I mean, imagine a skilled soldier nowadays.
Yeah, like a human fighter. Right?
Like in the army or something. You have they train for weeks, if not years, or weeks,
Imagine
months.
that, like tenfold.
Yeah, a bad example, but you understand. With elves, they have hundreds of years of combat training. That's unfathomable to our perspective as people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a completely different game.
And yet they still remain kind of like underpowered for what they should be in most fantasy lore.
Honestly, I agree.
Most fantasy lore, because there are very powerful elves in many different types of stories.
Talking about
this is the Elves podcast.
Talking about underpowered, can I introduce to you a race called Dragonborn?
I think everybody is interested in that.
So Dragonborn, they are not literal dragons. They are simply humanoid creatures with dragon features, such as scales, some claws, fangs.
The heads of dragons.
Imagine someone cosplaying as a dragon, as a person.
It's like a
and they
lizard
can-
person, but cooler looking.
Yes, yes. And they can also breathe like fire and lightning.
If you've ever seen the lizard from the old Spider-Man trilogy, the Amazing Spider-Man trilogy, just the scientist that turned into the villain,
Yes.
the lizard, it's
Yes.
like that, but cooler.
And like smaller.
Yeah, a little bit.
A little bit.
Dragonborn, you might recognize that name from Skyrim. So don't think this is just like a type of human. This is a literal, like, I wouldn't call them half dragons.
No,
I
no,
would call them half dragons.
It's not half dragon. It's just if dragons had a two-legged, two-armed stance and they don't fly.
Yeah, they lack a wing and a tail, or wings and a tail.
Well, they do have tails.
I'm reading they don't.
Well, I say they do.
Roll for initiative. Yeah, that's also another thing that we might talk about in another episode, where when disagreements happen within a campaign, you usually roll for it unless you're talking to the DM. Also, for anyone who doesn't know, DM is Dungeon Master. You'll hear us use a lot of like abbreviated terminology throughout the series, and we'll explain it if we can. If we forget, sorry.
So moving forward, another race that's pretty cool, half elf. Whenever someone's talking about a race in D&D, if they refer to half, they're talking about half human and then half of this other race. Usually, another example is half orc, but we'll get to that in just a second. Half elf is the offspring of an elf and a human, and so they have the traits of both intertwined, and really they get the best parts from both worlds. You get something called, we'll get into like no more specifics later, but you get the protection from some magics. You get to look like more of a human, so it's just a good mix. And they're very prevalent in just the D&D world as diplomats or just adventurers in general.
They are very similar to elves from what I've read.
Yes, the pointy ears, the demeanor. They do live. We were talking about lifespan earlier. They live roughly about the same as the human. So elves have, like, full-blood elves have an advantage over them as such, but they're they're very somewhat proud.
I'm reading they live often above 180 years.
Just with that, humans can live up to 70, 80 years old on average. With an elf, you've got 700 years, 800 years. So half elves are pretty down there, even below dwarves, closer to halflings, I would say.
They still have an amazing lifespan though compared to humans.
Oh yeah, of course.
Which is what we are most of the time.
A lot of D&D races are have these variations and different things for game mechanics and whatnot. We're just right now we'll be talking about the general themes and
the basic races.
Just giving you an image of what to.
There are a lot more playable races in this game.
But we're just gonna stick with the 9 in the player's handbook.
Yeah.
But I was also mentioning the half orcs.
Let's move on to them.
Half orc. Generally, when people think about orcs, they think of just these evil, warmongering creatures. With D&D, with D&D, they have this sort of bond with humans. Just the orcish clans, they're not always warring. D&D portrays them as oftentimes having regular affairs such as trading and communicating with other races and creeds of just the world, and sometimes they interact with humans, and sometimes they they make half-orcs.
Good explanation.
And so they have, like, as with half-elves, some of both worlds. You have orcish traits such as fangs, larger muscle composition, darker skin. You've got some, like, pointy ears, When I say dark skin, think of like grayish,
Yeah,
brown.
pigmentation is very like muted color palettes.
Yes.
Something that I also want to put in is that orcs exist very differently across different types of fantasy lore and fantasy media. The orcs that I know most personally are the Warcraft series orcs, which are green or brown, most of the time green. They are hunched over, they're huge. They're originally nomadic, shamanistic creatures, or humanoids, and a really good word to describe them would be nomadic. So that's kind of like a difference between the orcs that you may have heard of in like Lord of the Rings or the Hobbit trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
So just keep in mind that whenever we talk about D&D, there are also many other interpretations of these races in different types of media, or fantasy media. So it's up to your DM and your party what kind of orc or what kind of elf you want to play or be, if they allow that kind of variation in the game, because there are a lot of interesting interpretations out there. So don't feel like you're limited to these races. I guess that's my main point here. Don't feel like that these are your only choices. And I know I explained before that there are like multiples of 9 for races that I can see just on this one page that we're looking at in this book.
There are so many races.
Yeah.
So many.
And they're not just like
Fairly
offshoots or redesigns of the ones that we're talking about. They're like completely unique ones.
These races, just for D&D, I mean, these stem from the stuff that your parents were playing, like the nerds of your parents' age group were playing with. I'm talking 70s and 80s. Like, these things have been, like, not saying like the races have evolved, but the ideas and the cultures that Wizards of the Coast, who publishes D&D content, these are like the people who are keeping these cultures alive in this fantasy world, and they just evolve and get more developed as time goes on with the game.
It's very well said. And you'll see that with a lot of different things in this game, that they become more developed over time. Because I was talking to our resident dungeon master the other day, and I sent him a post that I saw online about a quote from the creator, is that right, of Dungeons & Dragons, Gary Gygax.
Yes.
Gary Gygax said, I'm trying to remember the exact quote. It was something like, if your player wants to be a dragon, let them, but just make sure they start off weak and get stronger along the way.
Here we go. There is absolutely no reason not to let a player be a dragon or anything else, so long as it starts off weak and goes up in power. Gary Gygax, D&D, 1974.
And that's something very interesting that we're going to touch on in our second segment, where the statistical differences of these races really affect gameplay, and that depends on what type of campaign you're doing or what your party is comprised of, and just what you prefer. Certain races have certain proficiencies in different types of weapons. Certain races have certain plus to their traits, but we'll get into that. So let's go on with the races we have left.
One more?
There
I believe.
2 more, I believe.
2 more. What have we gone over so far? We've done
Dragonborn, Dwarf, Elf, Gnome, Half-Elf, Halfling, Half-Orc.
Human. How can we forget? Humans.
Man, I know nothing about these ones. Forgot to study on them.
They're the most versatile, and I say versatile in game mechanics and just numbers race of all of the D&D races. They're kind of the... how do I say this?
Default?
Yeah, I'm going to say Swiss Army knife. They can really play any class in the game. Some races have tendencies to be better suited for different classes. Now with D&D, there's no discrepancy. You can play any race and class combination you want, but the numbers don't always add up in your favor.
That's where the stats come in, yeah.
You usually just choose a race and then choose a class based on your race. And then that's for character creation, because your class better suits your race. You wouldn't have and I believe we've already talked about classes before, but you imagine like a paladin or a barbarian, this big hulking, massive bulging muscles, big weapons, kind of, and then you have a 2 foot tall halfling saying like, ah! I don't know what sound just came out of my mouth, but you get the image. It's
Yeah,
halflings
that was a little scary.
aren't the best paladins or barbarians, but you can certainly play as one, and that's what
Oh yeah,
D great is just the role play, the fury of the barbarian and a 2 foot tall canister.
yeah. There are a lot of if you're a new player, I would suggest playing a human just to get used to it as your first character.
Oh,
I personally didn't, but I would recommend it.
humans also have, and this is just a reflection of the real world. What Wizards of the Coast has done with D&D is there are different, not like species or races, but cultures of humans, origins and cultures of humans in the published D&D world that DMs can use for world building, and some examples of these are ethnicities. The Kalashite, the Chandathon, the Damaran, Eluskan, like the list goes on, and you can think of this as American,
Different nationalities,
Chinese, Australian,
European.
Europe. You could say French, Spanish, African.
I think they got the point.
Yeah. So you have one called Mulan, and the description is dominant in the eastern and southeastern shores of the inner sea. The Mulan are generally tall, slim, and amber-skinned with eyes of hazel or brown. The book gives descriptions, origins, and reasons why, like what these humans look like.
They're very detailed too. Like they're not just physical.
Mhm.
Sometimes they go on to actually like behavioral and like cultural traits too. It's very interesting to read. So if you like hearing about all that stuff, I would suggest looking up a PDF or a website of the player's handbook, explanations of these ethnicities of the humans you can be in the game, because it's a very good read. And also, something that I want to talk about is variant humans. I know they're not one of our main races, but I think they're very interesting to mention here with the differences you're talking about.
Variant humans, compared to just the regular human race for D&D, are an option the Dungeon Master can take to just specialize the... How do I say this? Humans are the jack-of-all-trade race. They get what's called an ability score improvement to every single ability score in the game. Variant human instead only gets 2 bonuses instead of 6, because they're 6 abilities, 1 increase per ability. They get 2 increases in the ability scores of their choice, and then they get something called a feat, which can be very, very powerful, and it's just something that helps you further customize your human character, even before you choose your class.
Yeah, classes. We might redo a class episode. We did one of those in the past when we were still being broadcast on the radio, so we might make another one just to have that be in this series as well. Let's talk about probably the direct antithesis to humans. I think you know what I'm talking about.
Tieflings.
Yes. Talk about tieflings.
Now, these are... I'll tell you what. I'll give a brief description just straight from the book.
Try not to get too edgy with it.
Yeah, let's see.
Very hard with tieflings not to be edgy, by the way.
To be greeted with stares and sorry, before I say this is Dungeons and Dragons Wizards of the Coast copyrighted material straight from the player's handbook.
Yes.
And we'll say page 42, Tiefling. Quote, to be greeted with stares and whispers, to suffer violence and insult on the street, to see mistrust and fear in every eye. This is the lot of the Tiefling. And to twist the knife, Tieflings know that this is because a pact struck generations ago infused the essence of Asmodeus into their bloodline. And Asmodeus is an overlord or a demon in D&D lore. So yeah, their appearance and their nature are not their fault, but the result of an ancient sin, for which they and their children and their children's children will always be held accountable.
If you were to think of like basically demon person, this is what tiefling are.
It's more of, in the D&D lore, dealing with devils and demons and just the
Just bad guys.
bad guys are just not very common practices and are very frowned upon in societies. And then you have just the innocent people of all races say, "Oh, you dabbled in this witchcraft and this. Oh, dealing with devils." Ah.
Something. Jeez. Something interesting to note in this game is that the uses. It's not like some people may think that if you use magic, there's like no consequences. There's in this game because magic isn't real. I want it to be though. In this game, there are definitely consequences to using certain types of magic, and probably like death and shadow magic is very frowned upon, like you were saying.
Mm-hmm. And not even just that. It's more of, it's not. Let's see. With the generality of spells in D&D, you can go into so much lore and some specifics. I'll get a little specific here. You have you have different types of spells, and the most prevalent of the spells are with paladins and clerics, being with like the holy light and not trying to get like religious or
yeah,
push.
This is all in the game for anyone who needs
all in the game. Lots of people follow these religions and have these like holy blessings from angels and gods and goddesses, and it's good and they bring life and spring forth. But on the other side of it, there are the demons and even evil gods, and tieflings are just the result of somebody doing a whoopsie. I made a deal with the devil, and they had kids, and then the kids are like, "Mommy, Daddy, why am I? Why do I have
my blood hurt?
Why do I have horns? And why can I see in the pure darkness? And why do I look like I just crawled out of like
Satan's chimney,
Satan's basement?"
Yeah, tieflings are not. They're really cool looking, but they're not like sunshine and rainbows.
No. It's not. It's just appearances. You can play a tiefling as a good person in D&D. It's just they have some connection to a very dark power.
Oh yeah.
And this is like, with this episode, we just wanted to iterate the role-playing aspect of the races of Dungeons and Dragons without getting into the numbers and really nerdy stuff.
The lore, if you will.
Yes, the lore. Because Dungeons and Dragons is a role-playing game.
Yes.
Better to just talk about the role-playing stuff.
Speaking of that, our second segment is going to be talking about the statistics, so let's get into that. So we'll go back through from the top of what we talked about, starting with dwarves, and we'll tell you their stat increases and their natural stuff. Let me find this real quick. So ability scores are things that kind of like you get increases to depending on your race and depending on your class and depending on your level, or depending on any item you have increased or equipped.
Good way to talk about ability scores is they're your physical traits and they're just the numbers.
Yes. So there are 6 of them. The first of which being strength, and that measures physical power.
Mm-hmm.
The next is dexterity, that measures your agility. The next is constitution, that measures your endurance and your ability to heal from things and recover from things.
Mm-hmm.
Next is intelligence, that measures your reasoning and memory. Next is wisdom, that measures your perception and insight. And the last one is charisma, that measures your force of personality. The last 3 are kind of like simpler to explain. The first 3.
The first 3 are like the physical.
Yes.
Like the body, and the last 3 are the mind.
Yeah. So if you're like a half-orc versus a gnome, your strength is obviously going to be higher. And if you're a gnome, your intelligence is going to be higher in most cases.
Yes.
But starting off with dwarf again, your ability score increase, your constitution score increases by 2 if you're a dwarf. So you get to add a +2 to your constitution if you are a dwarf, and that means that if you roll a constitution check, like let's say you drank a potion or something and it turned out to be not a potion and like some kind of poison or something.
Yeah.
And your DM tells you to roll a constitution check, you would roll your 20-sided dice and add 2 to whatever your roll was. So you have a natural bonus to your constitution, if that makes sense.
Just higher constitution is if you were to get sick or you were to get poisoned, or it's just not just like the physicality, because you could be scrawny, but at the same time you could be able to hold your poison.
Yeah, and they also have dark vision. That's something you'll see a lot of races have. And just the description of that. Accustomed to life underground, you have superior vision in dark and dim conditions. You can see in dim light within 60 feet of you as if it were bright light, and in darkness as if it were dim light. You can't discern color in darkness, only shades of gray. So it's basically like night vision. So you're going to see a lot of like underground dwelling races, like gnomes, or rock gnomes specifically. Most dwarves and some halflings have dark vision as well as a lot of elves because of their like magical properties.
A lot of races, not human, but a lot of races.
Yeah, pretty much everyone, buddy. And another thing the dwarves have is dwarven resilience. You have an advantage on saving throws against poison, and you have resistance against poison damage explained in the combat section. So they have sections on these sites and in these books saying what resistances certain races have. In this case, for dwarven resilience, which is a thing you get as a dwarf, you have advantage on and resistance against poison damage. And I didn't even read that before making an example about drinking poison. So that's something you have a natural resistance to.
Smart boy.
And let's just go with the ability score increases because you can go forever explaining the racial traits they get. The next one we had was gnomes, correct?
Yeah, we'll talk about gnomes now. So gnomes.
Where is it?
But I can find it before you.
I already found it. Their intelligence increases by 2, just like I said. They also have dark vision as well, and they have gnome cunning. You have advantages on all intelligence, wisdom, and charisma saving throws against magic. So that's pretty cool.
A good example of that would be, let's say someone casts a spell to try to control your mind or make you fall asleep. In some circumstances, your DM would say make a saving throw, and since it was based on a spell, you would have advantage, which just means you roll the d20 twice and take the higher of the two. So increasing your odds just a little bit of succeeding your save and not being able to fall prone to the magic.
Yes. And I agree. I have no reason to disagree with that. Our next one was elves, correct?
Halfling.
Or was it dragonborn? No, it was halfling.
Halfling.
Halflings. What do they have? I forgot.
I found it.
They have an increase to dexterity, plus 2 to that. So they're very, like, as we explained before, very dexterous creatures. They're innovators. They're inventors sometimes.
No, that's gnome. Halflings are the farmers' hobbits.
My bad. They're really similar.
It really is. A lot of the D&D races are very, very, very similar. It's just some like stark differences in culture and image that you can see.
Yes.
Think of gnomes as like the tinkerers. They spend all of their days hiding in their house, making little inventions, and then the halflings are the people running through the woods, foraging wild mushrooms and just being outside more. That's why they're dexterous.
Yeah, they're very like. I'm just gonna say what you said again. They're very like outdoorsy and foraging.
Now, halflings do have a really cool ability called Lucky.
Would you explain it to me?
When you roll a 1 on the d20 for an attack roll, ability check, or saving throw, so generally like anything you use a d20 for, you can re-roll the die and you must use the new roll. So if you roll a 1, which is essentially in D&D, I believe we talked about this briefly before, when you roll a die and it's a d20, it's more of like a percentile. A 1 being 5% chance or lower, like the lowest you can perform, and 20 being you performed the best you can in a scenario. If you roll a 1, which people refer to as a natty 1 or a natural 1, essentially it's sort of a meme at this point where just the worst of the worst things happen to you. Halflings are lucky, so they'll get to re-roll that 1, and if it's a 1 again, you have to keep it, but they have another chance at succeeding. They're just lucky.
I'm entranced by that feat, or that ability. It's very, very, very useful.
Speaking of that Freudian slip, there is a feat called the Lucky Feat in D&D, and it is very, very useful.
Wait, how was it a Freudian slip if I was right?
Not for it just an idea that we were going to talk about later, just not now.
They were saving it.
It's juicy.
Anyway, speaking of that, let's talk about elves.
You forgot about brave and halfling nimbleness.
They can figure it out. They're brave and they're nimble. Like, what else? What else is there?
Oh man, elves. You got this one.
Yeah, so they get an increase to dexterity as well. And what I would assume that's from is because they just have had hundreds of years or thousands of years to refine their skills. So they're very dexterous creatures. And they also have dark vision. They have keen senses. You have a proficiency in the perception skill. So that's an up to, like, I mean, everybody knows what perception is, your ability to perceive things. Like, if something's happening around you, you have a higher chance of noticing it if you're an elf. And they have Fey ancestry. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can't put you to sleep. That is extremely useful if you're in a world with a lot of magic and a lot of wizards, which is most D&D worlds. They also have trance. Elves don't need to sleep. Instead, they meditate deeply, remaining subconscious for 4 hours a day. I find that also extremely useful because long rests are a gigantic part of the game where you need to do them pretty much every time you want to regain spell slots or health. So elves are up there for probably the best race you could play. Just for anyone new to the game or considering rolling another character for a campaign they might be participating in soon. Elf is a good way to go most of the time.
That's before sub races. Like
That's
those
before
are
class.
That's before a lot of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's next? Half elf?
Yes.
They also have dark vision and Fey ancestry. And they also have skill
about
burst
that
still.
their elven ancestors.
Yeah, it's almost like they're half elf.
Oh.
They have proficiency in 2 skills of their choice. So, proficiency is basically the same as an ability score increase. It just doesn't go into your ability score, it goes into your other traits, correct?
We're gonna do a whole podcast of just yeah. Well,
We could have a whole episode on ability scores.
that should be our next episode.
Should it?
Yes.
I don't think
Just
I'm mentally ready for that.
not ability scores, but just everything on the character sheet.
Alright, strap in, everybody. We went through... We didn't do Dragonborn yet, let's do that. I'm gonna guess it's strength. Yep. Your strength score increases by 2, and your charisma score increases by 1. Which I can understand, because why wouldn't you be persuaded by a dragon person if they were trying to get you to do something?
Now, charismatic can be intimidation. It could also be
Yeah, I forgot about
inspiring.
that. I'm guessing it's mostly used for intimidation, but yeah, inspiration as well.
Let's see, what else? Humans?
Well, they also have draconic ancestry, but you don't have to read it if you don't want.
I don't want to. No, I'm kidding. Let's go.
They have draconic ancestry. They choose one type of dragon from the draconic ancestry table. Your breath weapon and damage resistance are determined by the dragon type, as shown in the table. And that table referenced, you can be a black, blue, brass, bronze, copper, gold, green, red, silver, or white dragon.
And each of these dragon types has their own damage type associated with the colors. So black dragon spit acid, blue dragon spit lightning, brass spits fire, etc., etc. And as I was saying before, with a dragonborn, you could literally breathe like fire or lightning.
That's what it's referencing by your breath weapon.
Yes.
I wasn't
This
specific
just
about that.
depends. It just depends on your why you're a dragonborn, where your parents came from.
And that is their next racial ability. It's the breath weapon, but it's very long. I'm not going to read it because we just explained it.
An elemental sneeze.
That's a perfect way to explain it, actually. All right. Next, we have half-orcs. I'm guessing their strength as well. I would be correct. And they have a constitution increase by 1, which makes sense because they're half-orc. And orcs are really, like, steadfast. Not steadfast, but what word am I looking for?
They have a history of making soup that is not soup.
I don't know what that means, but they're staunch. That's the word I was looking for. So, they also have dark vision. They have menacing as one of the racial abilities. You gain proficiency in the intimidation skill. So that's what we were talking about with Dragonborn, where they might use their plus to charisma for intimidation, but half orcs have proficiency in the intimidation skill directly. They are very intimidating looking. They have relentless endurance. When you are reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright, you can drop to 1 hit point instead. You can't use this feature again until you finish a long rest. So that's interesting, actually. I didn't know half orcs had that. So if they're hit fatally, they don't die outright, or they don't fall unconscious outright. They drop to 1 hit point instead, so it's like a death save, like an automatic death save.
I imagine it's more of death comes knocking on the door, and it says, "Time to go," and the half-orc says, "No,
I
you."
installed locks.
With the door open. I installed locks.
Death is like, "Where's the spare key?" And they're like, "I lost it."
I don't remember.
You moved your potted plant. The third thing they have is savage attacks.
You moved the gnome.
Yeah, if a half orc lived in the suburb, they definitely have a lawn gnome that they have a spare key under.
Oh my goodness. New sub-race of gnome, lawn gnome.
I want to make that.
Alright.
We're done, we're doing that. Alright, savage attacks. They have, when you score a critical hit with a melee weapon attack, you can roll one of the weapon's damage dice one additional time and add it to the extra damage of the critical hit.
Woo! More numbers!
Basically, yeah, that just buffs your damage. If you get a crit, you could just add another damage dice onto it. So that's like, it rewards you for getting crits, which sounds like something an orc would have.
And just to clarify, criticals are when you make an attack roll against an enemy and you roll a natural 20, not scoring a 20 total.
Yeah, if you roll your d20 for your attack roll and you get a 20.
Gotta sneeze.
Oh. Breath attack.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
going to be interesting in the audio. So, moving on to humans. As our resident dungeon master explained before, they have a natural ability score increase to every ability score, so that's very useful. And
We've been talking about ability score increases of 2 and 1, so like 2 or 3 total points. Humans get 6 total points added to their ability scores. That's one for each 6 abilities. That's 6 points. That's huge.
yeah, it's very interesting to see in play.
But you did mention variant humans. They only get 2 points total, and then the feat, and like I said, it's very fair because feats can be very, very powerful.
You can get those remaining 4 points through feats sometimes.
Hmm.
Also, humans have nothing else for racial abilities.
Yep.
So that ability score increase is absolutely fair.
No, let's see.
They got nothing.
They
No
have
dark vision, no ancestry thing, they're just humans.
they have
Dudes and women walking around.
they have face.
Yeah, they do have that. So tiefling.
You are correct.
Yeah. Good job. Sherlock, you did it.
Woo!
So tiefling have an increase to intelligence by 1 and an increase to charisma by 2, which makes sense because they are very intimidating, alluring looking creatures sometimes.
Yes.
They're tall, they're threatening looking, and they're very exotic.
Dark vision as well.
Huh?
Dark vision as well.
Yes, they also do have dark vision, and they have hellish resistance. You have resistance to fire damage. So, they also have infernal legacy.
Would you like me to just give a brief summary of this?
Yeah.
Essentially, because of their demon or devil, whatever have you background, they get a certain list of spells that they can just cast. And yeah, we'll get into spellcasting later, but it's just something they inherently know.
Later, it's in a different episode.
Yes, later.
So we can have a whole episode about spells and the spells different classes get. Well, that means we gotta have the class episode first, so got a lot of content coming your way, people.
Oh,
Those are, and we could also go into the languages that each race speaks, but it's pretty simple for the most part. And you can learn other languages with languages that you like naturally know.
and we'll have each of the podcasts. We'll redo them in each of the D&D languages. That way, it's
Yeah.
you guys
So
for
we'll do one
everyone.
on Dwarvish, Infernal, Elvish.
Undercommon,
Yeah.
Celestial,
Goblin,
Orin,
Draconic.
Human.
Oh yeah, that one's gonna be hard.
Yeah. So
I
weird.
gotta learn that language.
Hard to learn.
Yeah. Jokes aside, well, we're not really being serious, but those were our races. We went through the lore of each race, roughly, and the origins of each race, roughly, and the statistical increases of each race, roughly.
Yeah.
There's a lot more that you can learn yourself about these races.
The best way to learn is just to sit down and read.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah. I believe that's it for this episode. I am pretty sure this podcast will be releasing bi-weekly, so expect us 2 Fridays from now.
All right.
Not you, you're going to be here.
I'm excited.
I am too.
Woo!
Next episode, we're probably going to get deeper into the classes of this game and the nuances and statistical increases and decreases of those.
And we'll probably give our preferences, like our personal favorites for classes.
Oh yeah, that's what I forgot. We need to pick our favorite races. So, I'm restricting this thing to any race. Not just the 9 we talked about.
Huh.
I know what mine is.
Oh, gosh. How about we choose one from the 9, and then we choose our favorite race overall.
All right.
My favorite race is the Dragonborn. I like them for their bonuses, and especially because I can just breathe fire in some cases,
Or anything.
or lightning, or
Yeah,
acid.
breathing lightning is kind of cooler than breathing fire to me.
I believe
Personally.
the last time I played a Dragonborn, I did have the lightning variation.
That sounds sick. I'd say out of these 9, my favorite race is Dwarf.
Mm-hmm.
Just because in the campaign that you and I played together in, I played a Dwarf. And
Yes.
it was a very cool character.
It took a lot of planning.
Yeah, and it paid off, definitely. It was really fun to play. Specifically about Dwarves, I like doing the voices for them. Because I played World of Warcraft for many years, and the Dwarves in that game have very distinct accents and voices, and I find them very fun to do. I think my favorite race overall would have to be Kenku. That's Kenku for anyone knowing or wondering how that's spelled. And they're raven people, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Raven or crow, whatever you'd prefer.
About the size of a human.
Yeah, about like between 5 and 5'5".
Yeah, a little on the average height of a female human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They are interesting. They have been cursed to lose their flight and their ability to speak.
Well, they do have an ability that makes up for this, if you'd like to describe it.
Mimicry is that ability, and fun fact, actual crows and ravens can do that in real life. They can mimic speech just like parrots, but like to a limited ability. But yeah, I am making a Kenku for the next campaign that we play, that you know of, and I... just to tease a little bit about classes, I chose a bard for that character. Bards are built on musical talent and persuasion and singing and performance. Kenku can't speak themselves.
They can't form their own words from their own voice. They have to form
Words they've heard before from other people.
Yes.
Or anything. Sounds too.
Yeah, those two. And
if a Kenku heard a rim shot, like a boom, they could mimic that.
Perfectly. It would be the exact same thing. You could not distinguish.
Yeah. So it's a very interesting race. And those are like just 2 of the races that weren't on the list that... Wait, did you choose one that wasn't on the list yet? You should do that.
I'm still sticking with Dragonborn.
Alright. So yes, in the next episode we will get to classes, and it'll make a lot more sense why we're saying certain things about certain races in this game when we get to that point. So, look out for that 2 Fridays from now. Thank you for listening.